The words hit the conference call like a slap across the face. "Just mute him," Austin Caldwell said, his voice dripping with that particular brand of millennial contempt that made my jaw clench. "Gary's stuck in the past anyway. My name is Gary Hoffman. I'm 54 years old, and I've been keeping Southwest Supply Chain's digital infrastructure running for 18 years. That Tuesday morning, I watched my microphone icon go gray on the investor call, cut off mid-sentence while trying to explain why their fancy new system was about to violate 3 federal transportation regulations. 18 years. I built this place from nothing but copper wire and determination. When I started here in 2006, we were running logistics on spreadsheets and prayer. I designed every backup protocol, every fail-safe system, every security layer that kept this company profitable through the 2008 crisis, the supply chain disruptions of 2020, and every challenge in between. Half the engineers in this building learned their craft sitting next to my desk, watching me troubleshoot problems that would have shut down operations for weeks. And now, Howard Caldwell's 29-year-old son wanted to mute me because I dared question his vision. Austin rolled in 6 months ago when Howard announced retirement. Howard understood logistics wasn't about pretty dashboards but moving freight from point A to point B without losing money or breaking federal law. His son arrived with a Stanford MBA, designer sneakers, and the unshakable belief that 18 years of infrastructure was just technical debt holding back his transformation. I knew we were in trouble when Austin hired Derek Walsh, some consultant who wore black turtlenecks and used synergy in every sentence. Together, they unveiled a presentation about reimagining supply chain architecture that looked like it was designed by a marketing firm that had never seen the inside of a warehouse. Every slide had gradients and buzzwords, not a single technical specification. Look, I wouldn't normally pause here, but if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button. It costs you nothing and helps me keep telling these stories about what happens when experience meets arrogance. The red flags started small. My weekly operations review got moved from Tuesday to Friday, then Friday to we'll circle back on scheduling. The Slack channel where my team tracked critical alerts got archived without warning. Carlos Rivera, one of my best network engineers and a guy I'd personally trained from junior tech to senior systems analyst, suddenly found himself dual-aligned to Austin's transformation pod. When I asked what dual-aligned meant, Jessica Torres, Austin's 26-year-old strategy catalyst, explained it meant Carlos would be leveraging his legacy knowledge while embracing forward momentum methodologies. Translation: they were gutting my team one person at a time. I raised concerns and got labeled change-resistant. When HR suggested I might benefit from emotional agility training, I knew which way the wind was blowing. They weren't just reorganizing, they were clearing the deck of anyone who might question their approach. So I adapted, started keeping my own records. Every system handoff, every compliance check, every vendor authorization that got bypassed in the name of innovation. After 18 years of building rock-solid infrastructure, I wasn't about to watch it crumble because some kid with an MBA thought legacy systems were embarrassing. I logged everything, not in their shiny new cloud platform that Austin had moved us to without proper redundancy testing, but in secure archives I maintained through my own consulting company. Clear Hill Systems, a small LLC I'd set up years ago for contract testing and kept alive as a backup plan. And I started drafting a document, quietly, legally, buried in a routine infrastructure service agreement like an insurance policy you hope you never need. It was a simple clause stating that if critical operational systems got reassigned without proper technical review from the designated infrastructure officer, full administrative access would revert to an external trust. That external trust? Clear Hill Systems, which meant me. The clause was elegant in its simplicity. If they wanted to bypass my technical authority, they'd lose access to the systems that authority protected. Nobody read it because nobody reads contracts when they're busy disrupting everything. Legal approved it because it looked like standard liability protection. Austin's team ignored it because they were focused on their flashy presentations. By spring, Austin had his squad running the place like a Silicon Valley startup. The company blog featured pictures of standing desks and kombucha on tap. Internal communications looked like tech conference slides. Meanwhile, my remaining team was patching back-end failures with digital duct tape, keeping 18 years of battle-tested infrastructure from collapsing under Austin's improvements. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every system they called obsolete was actually holding up their entire transformation. The routing algorithms I'd written handled peak traffic loads Flomax couldn't touch. The security protocols I'd implemented after 9/11 were the only thing preventing their cloud-first architecture from becoming a compliance nightmare. I stayed quiet, stayed useful, stayed invisible, answered questions when asked, fixed problems when they escalated beyond their capabilities, watched 18 years of mentoring and relationship building get dismissed as legacy thinking by people who'd been out of college for less time than I'd been protecting their paychecks. But I was documenting everything, every bypass, every shortcut, every decision made without proper review, building a case not for revenge, but for the inevitable moment when competence would be needed again. That moment came faster than I expected. Until that Tuesday when Austin decided to publicly humiliate me in front of our biggest investors. The new system launch was supposed to be Austin's coronation moment. He called it Flomax, a unified dashboard that promised to replace 5 different systems with one magic interface. The presentation deck had more animations than a Disney movie and twice as many buzzwords. One platform to rule them all, Austin kept saying, apparently unaware that reference ended with fire and destruction. Problem was, none of those 5 systems actually worked together the way he claimed. Our warehouse management system ran on protocols I'd designed specifically for DOT compliance. The vendor API handled 47 different shipping partners with individualized authentication keys. The inventory tracking system processed real-time updates from 12 distribution centers across 3 time zones. Flomax was basically a pretty wrapper trying to make sense of architecture it didn't understand. I wasn't invited to the planning meetings. My calendar got cleared without explanation. When I asked Jessica Torres, Austin's strategy catalyst, if there'd been a mistake, she gave me a patronizing smile and said I didn't need to worry about the forward-facing elements. "Gary," she said, leaning back in her ergonomic chair like she was explaining colors to a toddler, "this is about user experience and stakeholder engagement. You've done amazing work building the foundation, but now we need to focus on the customer journey. Customer journey. As if freight logistics was about feelings instead of getting 40,000 pounds of auto parts from Detroit to Phoenix on schedule. The tools we'd built weren't Instagram pretty, but they worked. No lag, no crashes, no 30-second load times between menu clicks. They were fast, stable, and built specifically for our infrastructure. More importantly, they were bulletproof. In 18 years, we'd never missed a DOT compliance deadline, never lost a shipment due to system failure, never had a security breach that compromised customer data. Flomax, by contrast, was basically a fancy skin wrapped around a back end that couldn't handle real-world logistics. The demo looked great in Austin's presentations, but demos don't process 50,000 tracking requests per hour or interface with TSA cargo screening databases. 2 weeks into the rollout, things started breaking. Shipping delays doubled because Flomax couldn't parse the priority codes our legacy systems used for rush deliveries. Customer service logged complaints about tracking numbers that led to error pages because the new system generated URLs in a format our web servers didn't recognize. Austin's response was to call more alignment sessions and hire another consultant to explain why mindset was the problem, not software. Every meeting featured another slide deck about embracing change and thinking outside the box. Meanwhile, Carlos and my remaining team members worked 16-hour days patching the gaps between what Flomax promised and what it actually delivered. The breaking point came during that quarterly investor call. Austin was halfway through his presentation about fully modernized operational pipelines when he put up a slide claiming we'd eliminated all legacy dependencies and achieved full compliance automation. That was a flat-out lie. Our warehouse routing still ran on the core systems I'd built, because Flomax couldn't handle the complex conditional logic required for hazmat classification. The DOT compliance module was still pulling data from my original database architecture because Austin's team had never bothered to understand how federal transportation regulations actually worked. We were one audit away from losing our federal transportation certification, and Austin was telling investors we'd achieved full automation. I unmuted myself. After 18 years of keeping this company compliant, profitable, and operational, I wasn't going to sit silent while someone lied to our investors about our technical capabilities. "That's not accurate," I said, keeping my voice level. "The routing module still depends on the original infrastructure for conditional processing, and Flomax doesn't meet DOT timestamp requirements for hazmat tracking. We're not fully automated, and we're definitely not compliance ready." Austin's face went red. I could see him on camera glancing at Jessica, then at someone off screen. His jaw clenched the way it did when someone challenged his authority in front of people who mattered. That's when he said it, loud enough for every investor on the call to hear. Just mute him. Gary's stuck in the past anyway. Jessica fumbled with the controls, and my microphone icon went gray. That was it. The line in the sand. Not because I was wrong. I was absolutely right, and Austin knew it. But because I was inconvenient. Because 18 years of expertise didn't fit into his narrative of transformation and innovation. So I reached off screen, picked up a plain, cream-colored envelope I'd prepared months earlier, and held it up to the camera. Just long enough for several investors to notice. Just long enough for Austin to see it and wonder what it contained. Then I logged off without saying another word. The envelope contained the notarized activation of Clause 14.1c from our infrastructure service agreement. The clause I'd buried in routine paperwork 2 years earlier when we brought hosting back in-house to reduce cloud costs. A simple paragraph that would transfer operational control of all critical systems back to Clear Hill Systems if certain conditions were met. Those conditions? Unilateral system changes without technical review from the designated infrastructure officer, which Austin had done repeatedly over the past 6 months. And the trigger? What the clause called functional removal of technical authority without cause during formal compliance discussion. Getting muted on a corporate call while raising DOT compliance concerns qualified perfectly. I walked to my filing cabinet, pulled out the original service agreement, and checked the timestamp on my notarized activation document. Everything matched. Then I sat back in my kitchen, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and waited for the first system to fail. It didn't take long. The infrastructure I'd built might have looked obsolete to Austin's team, but it had one advantage their flashy new systems lacked. It actually worked. And now, legally speaking, it was no longer theirs to control. The overnight shipping sync failed at 2:17 a.m., which meant East Coast orders got routed through a backup system that couldn't handle the volume. By 4 a.m., packages were being duplicated in the tracking database. Some got sent to the wrong distribution centers. One shipment of industrial equipment somehow got routed to a facility that had been converted to a microbrewery 2 years ago. Flomax's dashboard showed everything as green and normal because it wasn't actually connected to the real routing systems. It was just displaying cached data from the last successful sync, painting a pretty picture while the infrastructure crumbled underneath. By 6 a.m., the help desk was drowning in tickets. Customer service started fielding calls about tracking numbers that led to 404 errors. The automated refund system kicked in, issuing credits for orders it thought were delayed, which triggered a cascade of inventory discrepancies that Flomax couldn't reconcile. Someone tried to reboot the whole system, but that's when they discovered the real problem. Flomax wasn't just broken, it was locked out. The server logs showed it was trying to pull data from tables it no longer had permission to access. Every API call was returning authentication failures. Every database query was hitting authorization walls. The weekend update had overwritten a critical dependency my team built 3 years ago, dismissing it as unused legacy code. Except it wasn't unused. It was the secure bridge between our internal systems and external vendor APIs. Remove it, and the whole ecosystem falls apart like a house of cards. I didn't answer the first email from Derek Walsh, or the panicked Slack message from Jessica, or the 7 a.m. voicemail that started with Gary. We're seeing some unexpected system behavior and devolved into barely controlled panic about cascading operational challenges affecting stakeholder confidence. I sat in my kitchen, drank my coffee black the way I had for 18 years, and watched the logs cascade across my private monitoring dashboard. Every failed connection attempt, every timeout, every error message was proof that 18 years of careful architecture couldn't be replaced by 6 months of buzzword-driven development. The beauty of good infrastructure is that it protects itself. The security protocols I'd built weren't just about preventing unauthorized access. They were designed to isolate critical systems when someone tried to break them. Austin's team hadn't just made Flomax. They'd made it badly, and now my systems were quarantining the infection. By 9 a.m., operations was in full meltdown. Order processing had stopped entirely because Flomax couldn't verify customer shipping addresses against the database it no longer had access to. The warehouse management system was printing duplicate pick lists because it was trying to sync with routing data that didn't exist. 2 major vendors had already called to complain about API timeouts affecting their delivery scheduling. Carlos texted me directly, bypassing Austin's communication protocols. Gary, the whole back end is locked up. Flomax can't authenticate with any of the core modules. Legal is asking questions about system ownership and access rights. What the hell did you do? I didn't reply immediately. Carlos was a good engineer and a better person, but he'd been reassigned to Austin's transformation pod. He needed to learn that actions have consequences, even when you're just following orders. Around 10 a.m., someone in Austin's team tried to roll back the weekend updates. That's when they discovered they didn't have rollback permissions. Those permissions lived in a secure administrative partition that, as of Tuesday night when I activated Clause 14.1c, no longer recognized Austin's team as authorized users. The legal team found the clause around noon. I could imagine Pat Wells' face when she hit that paragraph buried in a routine infrastructure service agreement from 2022. A simple clause that transferred administrative control of critical operational systems to an external trust, Clear Hill Systems, if certain procedural conditions were met. Those conditions had been met repeatedly over the past 6 months. Every system change pushed without my technical review. Every access modification made without proper documentation. Every security protocol bypassed in the name of agile development. All logged, all time-stamped, all perfectly documented in my private archives. But the real death blow was the activation mechanism. The clause wasn't triggered by intent or malice. It was triggered by event, specifically the functional removal of technical authority during formal compliance discussion. Austin muting me on an investor call while I was raising DOT violations wasn't just bad leadership. It was the exact breach of protocol the clause was designed to address. The activation was automatic, legally binding, and retroactive to the moment my microphone went silent. By afternoon, the damage reports were rolling in. 3 major shipping partners had suspended service due to API failures. The Department of Transportation had sent a preliminary compliance inquiry after receiving automated alerts about missed reporting deadlines. Customer service was fielding hundreds of calls about delayed or missing shipments. Austin called an emergency all-hands meeting to address what he termed temporary integration challenges with our digital transformation initiative. The meeting lasted 12 minutes before someone asked why the person who built the original systems wasn't helping with recovery. Gary's not being collaborative, Austin said, his voice tight with frustration. He's chosen to be obstructive rather than supportive of our modernization efforts. Jessica added, "We're confident our engineering team can resolve these transitional issues without relying on outdated approaches. But confidence doesn't fix broken APIs or restore database connections." By 5 p.m., the company was losing $85,000 per day in failed deliveries, penalty fees, and emergency vendor charges. 2 board members had called for explanations. One major client had threatened to suspend their contract pending resolution of shipping delays. That's when Pat Wells called me directly. "Gary," she said, her voice professional but strained, "the board would appreciate an opportunity to discuss our current operational challenges. We understand there may be some contractual complexities that require your input." I let the silence stretch for a moment. After 18 years of quiet competence, after being muted and marginalized and dismissed as legacy thinking, I figured I'd earned the right to let them sweat. "I'm listening," I finally said. They asked if I could help. If I'd consider re-engaging on a consulting basis to address what Pat carefully termed operational continuity challenges. Everything was still burning, and their recovery playbook was blank. I'd prepared for this conversation for months, not out of malice, but out of experience. After 18 years in corporate infrastructure, I knew that competence eventually becomes essential again, usually when the people who dismissed it realize they can't function without it. "I have a proposal," I said. "It's comprehensive, and it's non-negotiable." The terms were straightforward. Immediate reinstatement of my team under independent contract through Clear Hill Systems, with full technical authority over all infrastructure decisions. Retroactive indemnity for any compliance issues or system failures dating back to Austin's transformation initiative. Direct board-level access for all future vendor transitions and security implementations. And a consulting fee of $750,000 wired to Clear Hill Systems within 48 hours of system recovery. Pat didn't try to negotiate. She couldn't afford to. The board will review your proposal and respond formally by end of business today. They didn't wait that long. By 2:30 p.m. I had written confirmation. The fee was approved, the indemnity granted, and the recovery was authorized to begin immediately. Howard Caldwell himself called to apologize for the situation and assure me that Austin would be reassigned to strategic projects pending a full review of the transformation initiative. But first, I had to fix 6 months of damage in 48 hours. I started by restoring core access permissions. The beautiful thing about the clause I'd written was that it didn't destroy anything. It just quarantined critical systems until proper authority was re-established. Every database, every API connection, every security protocol was intact, just locked behind authentication walls that Flomax couldn't breach. Carlos was the first person I called back. You want to help fix this mess, or do you want to keep pretending Austin's team knows what they're doing? Jesus, Gary, he said, relief obvious in his voice. I've been watching this place fall apart for weeks. Of course I want to help. Within 6 hours, my team was back online. Not just Carlos, but Patricia Martinez from Network Security, James Wilson from Database Administration, and Susan Clark from Vendor Integration. All people I'd trained. All people who understood that infrastructure isn't glamorous, but it's essential. We worked through the night, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. This was our system, our architecture, our 18 years of careful engineering. Watching it get broken by people who didn't understand it was like watching vandals spray paint a cathedral. By morning, the shipping sync was running clean. Order processing was back online. Customer tracking was functional. The DOT compliance module was generating reports that actually matched federal requirements instead of Austin's interpretation of what those requirements should be. Flomax was still broken, but that wasn't my problem anymore. My job was to restore operational stability, not to fix Austin's vanity project. The real satisfaction came in the details. Every system we brought back online was better than before, more secure, more efficient. We implemented updates I'd been planning for months but couldn't execute because Austin's team was too busy disrupting everything to let me improve anything. Then came the cherry on top. A formal offer to become Executive Vice President of Infrastructure and Strategic Operations, complete with equity, a corner office, and authority over all technical decisions. I read the email twice, then typed one line. Appreciate the offer. Declining. Pat called within the hour. Gary, I don't understand. This is everything you've been working toward. Full recognition, complete authority, substantial compensation increase. Pat, I said, my role was never about having the biggest title or the loudest voice in meetings. It was about keeping the lights on and the freight moving. About understanding that flashy isn't the same as functional, and disruption without understanding is just destruction with better marketing. The truth was simpler than that. I didn't want to be an executive. I wanted to be essential. Executives get blamed when things go wrong. Essential people get called when things need to be fixed. Austin got quietly reassigned to business development and strategic partnerships, which everyone understood meant he was being eased out. Jessica Torres left for another startup that promised her a Chief Innovation Officer title. Derek Walsh moved on to his next consulting gig, probably to disrupt some other company's perfectly functional operations. Howard came out of retirement, temporarily to stabilize leadership while the board searched for Austin's replacement. The first thing he did was establish new policies requiring technical review and sign-off for all infrastructure changes. The second thing was to make my consulting agreement permanent. I kept my independence, my team, and my dignity. More importantly, I kept control over the systems I'd spent 18 years building and protecting. On my wall now, where a generic landscape photo used to hang, sits a simple frame containing that cream-colored envelope, opened, flattened, with the timestamp clearly visible. A reminder that preparation isn't paranoia when you work with people who mistake confidence for competence. Underneath it, in black ink, I wrote the final lesson I'd learned. Next time, don't mute the person who built what you're standing on, because at the end of the day, you can disrupt all you want. You can rebrand and reimagine and revolutionize. But gravity always wins, and infrastructure doesn't care about your MBA or your vision board or your transformation initiative. It just works, or it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you better hope the person who built it is still willing to fix it. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about what happens when experience meets entitlement. Your old boss is probably sweating just thinking about it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's proving you were right all along.